No, that's not possible.
1,000,000 hours.
Like, I know you were using it as a figure of speech, but I'm wondering,
Well, let's see. 24 hours in a day.
365, so we have 5 digits, I think, if we multiply those. Nah, you'd have to be alive for...
67 years.
Oh, yeah?
I don't know.
No, I think 100 or 1,000. You'd have to be alive for either 100 or 1,000
It's
years.
getting up there, huh? Okay.
Cool.
Yeah, there we go.
All right.
Just unpacking.
Cool.
All right.
Well, I'm super excited. So we tried to record this episode before, but I had a $40 camera that I got off Amazon, and all of the footage got corrupted, so that's fun. But we are joined today by Dr. Chandler. He's a professor here at our Department of Psychology at UF. He also does conservation work in India for the Asian elephant. I love the acronym because it's one of the acronyms that did not have to butcher any of the words or leave any of the, you know how some acronyms will like leave out like 3 words or like capitalize a letter in the middle of one of the words to make it, all right, anyways. So yeah, the Conservation Initiative for the Asian Elephant, and yeah, but among many other things. So we're grateful for you. Sham and I have both taken I've taken both of your classes.
I've only taken the Psychology of Sustainability.
Right.
Cool. Yeah. So.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So speaking of those classes, I wanted to start off light, but we had a lot of readings, and those in those classes, or the PowerPoints made a lot of references to a lot of great texts, and I wanted to just start off with what work of writing influenced your worldview the most?
Oh, shoot. Okay, the first 2 things came to mind was anything from E.O. Wilson. So he's written probably 30 books. He passed 2 years ago at 92. He was a global ecologist. He's the first, probably the first scientist to talk about social ecology, and you know, like the communication and societies of like elephants and other sentient beings. Sociobiology was one of his books, but he wrote so many books. I probably have 20 or so of his books that I've read. And then on kind of the other vein, if you will, be reading about all the things that Jung wrote. So Jung first, and I think that's first of all, you know, is reading his writings is what encouraged me to start meditation, you know, and to take the Vipassana retreats and so on. And then, of course, I was an ecologist then, and after I started meditating, and those 2 combined, I think, led me to the Psychology of Sustainability.
Jung and Neil Wilson. So I've heard of Jung, and we've talked about him extensively on here, but Wilson, what sociobiology, what is that? Like, he studied the interactions that animals have and the social structures they have?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that was something that came later on as he started. He was recognized first as an ant expert.
Ant?
Yeah, he studied ants. Yeah, he studied ants all over the world. Actually, he's probably named more species than any ecologist has named. Some of them do not exist anymore. He's been on islands and found insects, including ants. The islands are no longer there. You know, so he had a fascinating a career. You know, with Harvard, he was at Harvard. But he started. You can find it's on the web, and I'm not going to remember exactly what it is, but it's basically the arc of all the archives of all the insects, all the creatures. It's a biodiversity library of some sort. It's all electronic, but yeah, every species that's ever been identified, subspecies and so on, is in this. That was his creation.
Wow.
It's really fascinating. He was an incredible writer too. Yeah, I just loved reading him. He wrote one novel that was, I think it's Anthill. He would have got a Pulitzer Prize for it. Yeah, it was a wild story. But, you know, some of it I'm sure was out of his own life because he had quite an interesting life, you know. Yeah.
So with social biology and thinking about ants are, I mean, such a great species to study social systems, and kind of what comes to mind is this collective type of cognition that these species share with each other, that I think all species might share with each other, to develop a sense of belonging and communication, as well as just help each other survive in threatening environments. Could you speak on whether he had any theories of like some kind of collective cognition?
Oh, absolutely, and that's what really, studying ants is what had him wonder more about larger, ecological or populations within ecological systems. But he was one of the first to know, like, different species of ants organized differently in their societies, and a lot of them have the same basic roles, soldiers and so on, and that a lot of them have different ways of going about it. Some of them actually go out and attack other colonies and kill them and eat them, and other ones build fortresses just to stay safe. And he studied termites. It was fascinating what he came up with, and the way that they communicate. When they touch each other, they're exchanging chemicals, and that chemical tells them where they've been and what they're doing and what they're about to.
What?
Yeah, do that. And so you wonder how all these ants are wandering all over the place. How do they ever get back to the nest? Well, they leave a trail of pheromones behind.
Right.
And so, wait, that's our people. They went this way, and then they went back this way. And so they.
Is the pheromone that they leave behind like the same type of chemical or a similar chemical that they're transmitting to each other through the touch?
Well, I think they're probably similar, but if I remember correctly, they're all different because that they have a chemical code, so that they can say, okay, I need to communicate this, so that there's a different way that they do that with the chemical, with the touch, and then there's versus what they leave to mark the trail. But he discovered all of this and talked about it, and he made some observations even about elephants. That's one of the things that drew me to the book. There's a picture of elephants on the front of it. So, but yeah, but insects were was his life. There's a funny story. I can't remember what book it was that he told this story in, but he was a very peaceful person. But he was also as tough as nails, And he was nerdy, like a lot of us are nerdy, but he had a magnifying glass and he was studying ant. Oh, he discovered the fire ant that's invaded the south of the United States.
Wow.
Discovered where it came from and how it came in with banana boats from the tropics.
Here in Florida, we have a lot of beef with those.
Yeah,
fire ants.
well, they came in Mobile Bay. It came in through the shipping port in Alabama. And he identified where they came from, but he was studying ants when he was like junior high or maybe elementary school. He was studying ants with a magnifying glass, and a bully came up and smashed the ants that he was studying. And so everybody was, kids standing around were aghast. Well, E.O. Wilson stood up, and the bully he thought, this is just this tall, skinny, nerdy guy, I'm like that. And E.O. Wilson cranked him. Shattered his nose, knocked him to the ground, and he said, I've seen some of the most beautiful creatures and places on earth, but sometimes the most beautiful thing I've seen is a bully with a bloody nose. Isn't that wild?
That's hilarious.
It's crazy, yeah.
Did he use the magnifying glass, or he just
No, he
clocked? We know what type of ant civilization he would have had if he were the leader, who would have been the offensive.
Yeah, he would have definitely been that, tried to keep the peace, but, can't always, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was good. Another funny story is, kind of funny story. He was raised in a very low SES. His mom raised him. His dad was absentee at some point permanently, and so anyway, but he loved to fish, and he would be outside all the time. And he was fishing one time off of a dock, and he, brim, sunfish, bluegill, red-breasted, so they're all the small, really colorful fish you see in the fresh waters around here.
Okay.
Anyway, he caught one. He set the hook. When he flipped it, he threw it out, and it threw the dorsal fin into his eye, and he lost the sight of one of his eyes when he was a kid. So he went all this time studying all these insects all over the world with basically one eye.
Wow.
Vision in one eye. Yeah, he got his PhD. He was renowned scientist, ecologist, and yeah, certainly didn't grow up with a silver spoon.
I mean, it sounds like he had like such a chip on his shoulder, like something that he needed to prove to like make a mark on the world. And
yeah,
like,
well, I think that what it was that he found meaning in insects and in the wild, and so that totally resonated with me too. Having kind of a similar background in a lot of ways, and then finding strength in nature and seeing how beautiful it was and being inspired by it, And I'm sure that's what drove him.
Yeah.
And that's what gave him the greatest joy. He wrote just so eloquently. He brought so many people into that understanding.
Everything from ants to elephants. That should be his autobiography. You should write him a biography called that.
There is a biography. It's called Scientist, written
Oh, wow.
by Richard Rhodes. And you know, so what crazy is that Maureen and I were we were on holiday it was over the winter break, I guess. And I was reading the last chapter of his book when she was reading the Times feed, New York Times feed, and said that, she said, "I'm sorry, but E.O. Wilson died today." I was reading the last chapter of his book.
Wow.
Yeah, so, but that's an excellent book, that written to a scientist.
Okay.
You'd love it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Did I digress too much?
No, we want that. We want that. Yeah. No, I've been thinking about animals a lot recently, and one of the things that stood out was when you mentioned that ants communicated with chemicals, because we just take it for granted that communication happens with speech sounds. But I was reading about how this is so random. Platypi use electrical signaling
Current.
between each other,
Yeah,
which is just so wild.
it is.
There's no better reminder of how big the world is than like comparative physiology. I feel like, you know,
Yeah,
like,
I
we
love
just get
that
such a
class.
small
Yeah.
subset of experience.
Yeah, comparative physiology, it was called in my undergrad anyway, comparative vertebrate zoology.
Okay.
But it was, and there was an invertebrate version of that too, but that was what they called the weeder. If you were an ecology major, you made it 2 years, and then when you got the critical tracking fifth semester, you had to take that one, and it was interesting to see how few people stayed in ecology after
That's
that.
you guys' orgo.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
Yeah.
You did your undergrad in zoology, or?
Ecology and physical geology. Mm-hmm.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Mhm.
Cool.
Yeah, I could have, so that was my minor. So you could take as much as you wanted, but you had to declare just one minor. You couldn't declare multiple minors.
Oh, okay.
And so I chose physical geology, but I could have done an agriculture, geography, or psychology, because I took enough courses for the minors in those too, but
Gotcha.
yeah.
Cool.
it was
Yeah.
good.
Lots of choices, lots of transformations in your life.
Yeah.
What has guided you through them? What's told you, well, I need to switch from being a limnologist to a psychologist and stuff like that? Like, what do you listen to?
Well, see, I mean, ultimately what I did is I just listened to my heart.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, after working in limnology, hydrology, water pollution chemistry for, 25 years, it just dawned on me. Well, part of it was I took some time off because I knew that I needed to start an elephant organization. I didn't know what that was going to look like, but in that kind of, call it midlife crisis, all happening at once, I started thinking about it, and I thought, here, let me back up. When I had a cabin on Lake Santa Fe, and I decided that I was not going to do any more hydrology or limnology studies or anything like that. I had some contracts I needed to finish, and I was shortly would finish those. And so I set up a table and I started doing a image map. You basically start, if you have an image of your very first year, the first picture you have, and then you build a spiral out of it with all the latest images until basically you create this upward spiraling picture story, if you will, of your life.
Okay.
And I don't remember where I got that, but so I was doing that. I was looking at that, and I was looking out. There was a dilapidated dock out from the cabin. There was an otter sitting on it eating a catfish. It was just idyllic,
Yeah.
great blue herons flying over and all that. And I said, this is really beautiful, but I'm not going to be doing this much longer. And so then I thought, okay, with that, what do I do? If that's a no going forward with this, what's the yes or what all? And that's when I started working on, first of all, the elephant organization. Later on, I would just stop and try to figure out why do we do what we do to ourselves on the planet.
Mhm.
And psychology, of course.
So midlife crisis, I need to start an elephant organization. We've all been there. That's everyone's midlife crisis, right? Nobody needs to start. No, that's super cool. Yeah. Wow, I didn't know you had a cabin on the Santa Fe River. You've had all sorts of interesting living arrangements.
Yeah, I just rented it. The woman had it was actually, it was probably more like a garage or a barn that she just closed in and put a window unit in it. It was really inexpensive, and that was good. Especially since I decided I wasn't going to be working anymore. Yes, I think it was $125 a month or something like that. And, no, the well was so shallow that it was contaminated, so I had to boil and filter the water. It was okay. It wasn't bad.
So what was that turning point for you for that questioning of why do we do this to ourselves and to the planet? Was it a specific moment, a specific set of experiences, a Vipassana retreat?
Well, yes. I mean, if you just all together, that was part of it, was, since I was very, very driven, and through my undergrad and my first time through graduate school, I was so focused on ecology, the science and so forth, that, there were certain things that were happening, for me that I just realized I couldn't, so psycho-spiritually, that I wasn't resolving well, I was overdriven, I was over everything, excess to, you name it. And so then when I started meditating and I went to Vipassana retreats, that's when I started finding, if you will, my center. Instead of just being, all very headstrong, started getting a touch for feeling, And I think that's a direct connection with nature, is when we start truly feeling who we are and how we feel, then we're most likely, right, we're gonna start connecting with the natural world. So that was that. And then having, I mentioned this in my TED Talk, so in the places I worked, primarily were in Texas, they're in the South, worked in the bayous in Louisiana, Mississippi, and look all over the western part and through Texas and that. But, so I see this just like phenomenally beautiful places, spring-fed streams like we have here, and wildlife, just all sorts of things. Then, of course, I was also responsible for investigating fish kills and pollution complaints. So American cyanamid down on the coast would decide that maybe they could get rid of their waste without paying for it and discharge it, and they misread the tide and brought it in and killed everything. In that whole lower part of the drainage basin. I saw so many things like that, I just thought, this doesn't make any sense. I'm a scientist that's simply recording, what's really good and what's really terrible, and I don't see anything happening. There was Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act, there was Endangered Species Act, all these things were working, but at a kind of a day-to-day level, it just seemed to me that we were getting worse. Where behavior was worse, the ramifications of it were worse, and
it's a relationship, right?
Yeah.
Daily interactions with nature.
Right, it's not cranial. If you really, everyone I've ever met that's been an ecologist, no matter what type of ecologist or environmental scientist, is very passionate about the environment, but I'm not sure if it's the science that's worked for them, and that's where they are, their science head is in that space, or if there's something else happening for them. I have met a few people that like myself, felt like no matter what I do, I have to do something to stop this, to make the world a better place.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the circuitous route to psychology, yeah.
So more or less you were like, all I'm doing is recording the damages and the improvements, but I want to see what's driving what behaviors and motivations are driving these outcomes.
Exactly, Jared.
Yeah.
So as I mentioned before, we talked about this, the sciences that I love so much still do, limnology and so on, are the sciences of how and what. Psychology is the science of why. And that's what I realized, that I'm not answering that question. That was probably the question that I had in my mind when I started, but I just didn't recognize it.
That is interesting.
Yeah.
I found a lot of people have similar things in their careers, but they don't even get to realize it. That they're interested in something, they're interested in questions that precede the questions they get to answer in their daily work.
Exactly. I think that if anyone, no matter their field, if it's a field of science or anything like that, they said, well, I really want to do this, or I love this, if they stopped and asked themselves why and actually answered that question, I think they'd come around to some pretty interesting, maybe some pretty serious direction changes. Or, yeah.
No doubt. So when you're making all these transitions, you have to let go of a lot of things. You've had to let go of a lot in your life.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering, what advice you have for someone who's afraid of letting go? They might have come to a realization in a journaling session or something like that, but they just don't want to. They're comfortable.
Yeah.
How do you approach it?
Well, honestly, I think that most change is pretty uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's part of it is pain reminds us of our mortality. Discomfort, even a slight little bit like, I don't even want to change the direction I'll go home in, I always ride on this road, but by the way, I do like to go to and from campus like 3 or 4 different directions, so I can get set in my way, but so, I understand that, it's convenient, you can turn it off, it's automatized, right, you just roll with it, and everything's fine, but until it isn't. And so that's the reckoning that comes with this, to say, well, okay, I know what's going on now, and I've identified that it is not working, or I don't feel comfortable with it anymore. I'm almost feeling discomfort with this that I thought was just fine. And then, so, okay, now what? So you have to ask, so you know how the Buddhists have a saying, something like this, if you form the question or ask the question, you already know the answer because the question comes from the answer, something to that effect. You guys probably know exactly what that is, but so then with that, it's like when I said, well, now what? When I realized I wasn't going to do this, I said, okay, I have to figure something out. Number one was the elephant organization and move along several years, and the second thing was, was psychology, and you really haven't any idea how good it will feel, and sometimes how uncomfortable it feels when you're in the process of transitioning, changing, yeah. So that was, part was so reputation, I had friends ask me when I told them I was stopping working at the Water Atlas and everything else, and I was going to go back to school and get a doctorate in psychology, and they had questions like, why? What's going on with you, man? You've got good money, you've got your science, you're good at it. They didn't know if I was that good at it or not because we didn't work together most of the time. But no matter, and I said, I just feel like and so when you say something to a scientist, especially more of the physical, environmental, chemical scientists, you say, I just feel like I need to do something different. Most of the time, they'll lean back quite a bit. Like, okay, what did you said feel? Something? Okay, don't get weird on me now. So,
I see.
But I think, and so for those of my friends that said something like that and have always stayed with me, and I've always, stuck with them too, it wasn't that they rejected the psychology necessarily. They didn't understand psychology, and there's a lot of misunderstandings about psychology. But what it was that it was change. And when I said, I just feel like I can't go on anymore with this, I don't feel like I'm being honest with myself because I do not feel like I'm approaching what it is I want to understand. Most people at some point, especially you get around my age, or well, this would be like 16 or so years ago, my friends are roughly the same age that I would talk with, every day. You can see sometimes when they lean back, they think, I thought about, and sometimes they've told me, I thought about, maybe I could do something else or like to do something else. The kids are gone now, why am I still doing the same thing? Yeah, it's comfortable, I have a good gig at the university, whatever, wherever, like this, but I thought about, wouldn't it be cool if and then I said, forget it, why do it now? Yeah, so when you see somebody change and they're doing their best to change for the better, often enough the people that are resisting that or not supporting you or whatever like this are trying to figure out what to do about their not changing with my thinking on it.
Yeah. When I think about change and the process of transition and letting go, something that's always come up is like, okay, if I let go of this, then where's the ground? What is like the solid footing that I can come back to? Am I just like falling into a void, into like this pit that I have no idea what's to come? Do you think like for you it was like you don't really have an idea of what's to come, but you're gonna embrace that, and the embracing of that is the ground, or was there a ground to fall back on, like your own psychological development and understanding of psychology?
Yeah, well, I like that what you said. Was this the prospect or the unknown, the ground? And my thinking has always been when I make a decision, make a change like that, I don't know what it looks like going forward. I have an idea of what it might feel like, but I'm fine with that because I have to go there, to stay and not move, or not change, not go there would be where I would not want to find myself.
Yeah.
To me, that's scary. Like remember when Lily, she's the artist. We talked about this in psychology sustainability. What's her last name? She started the Barefoot Artists, and she was, remember the story I told you about where she heard about this really awful part of Philadelphia where she was exhibiting her art at one of the galleries, really high end sort of a thing. And she heard about these derelict buildings and pimps and pushers and prostitutes all around. She said, I've just got to go see this. I've never seen anything like it, Lily Yang. And so she went there, and she just couldn't believe it. These buildings were burned out, there were bodies on the ground, she'd never seen anything like this before. And she called her friends, he said, get the van, bring scaffolding, tarps, buckets of paint. And she decided, I have to do something. What can I do? I'm an artist. What do I do about all this? She said, I'll paint a mural at the side of one of these derelict buildings. That's where by the way, all the murals and stuff, I think that's where this came from. This would be 20-ish years ago, 25 years ago. And so she was actually getting her stuff out, and I guess either her friends weren't there at the time or they'd left her there, I don't know, but so this enormous man comes up, and his name was Big Jack. And he was a pimp and a pusher and a very, very scary person. And he said, yeah, what are you doing here? She said, I'm going to paint a mural along the side of this building. He said, you're going to need a lot of help. He meant protection. She said, you're right. So she had got one level of scaffolding up. She climbed up. She said, "You're right. Hand me that bucket." So yeah. So he literally stayed there and helped her, and then also likely protected her. And then one thing led to another, and she started the Artist Not-for-Profit for Beautifying Places. What was really cool about it is that by that one act, just simply, okay, what can I do? I'm an artist. It's like Fresno. What can I do? I create this one lens that saved hundreds of thousands of lives. Well, she painted that. It got so much attention, and the landlords and the people that own that property are just letting it go. They're just taking money from people and letting them live there in squalor. All that started to transform to that whole area was renewed, was rebuilt. That part of the city.
Wow.
Police came in, cleaned it up. They got the pimps and the pushers out of there, and yeah. So just, what did I say? Oh, the reason why I mentioned this is so in this conference, it was at an Entrepreneur in Something and Sustainability. This was in where was it? Charlotte, I guess. No, Charleston. It was in Charleston. Sorry, Charleston, South Carolina. And so she was telling this story, and this woman stood up and said, "Weren't you afraid?" And she said, I was afraid not to. Mm-hmm. So that was the greatest fear, was to not do anything. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's where I got to that story. But that would be my greatest fear, is to know and not act. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. To the extent that we can. I mean, there's, we just have to go forward and hope that our heart and our mind will stay connected, and we're doing the right thing, and we might not ultimately be successful, with something we set our mind to, but we haven't failed because we tried. Mm-hmm. That's the thing. Right. And I think back on what you guys are asking, that's is that, or in our society, you either win or you lose. And that's really, you can go out there like anybody that competes in anything. A lot of people are not first, but they do it. So they didn't lose, right? They did what they needed to do. Right. Mm-hmm. That's a win. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Why are a lot of us so comfortable where we're at and not able to even understand that there is something on the other side? That, it's not even about fearing staying stagnant or staying where we're at right now. It's more so fearing what's different. Is that a key kind of mediator that separates us from our environment, that separates us from adapting to the changes that are happening in our world in every moment? Is that why we stay so disconnected?
Yeah, well, Shabi, I think that a lot of what we're talking about just now with the connection with nature is, so environmental identity, generational amnesia, environmental numbness, those areas of study are all about how the more modernized that we've become is the more we've controlled ourselves out of a natural existence. Mm-hmm. Let's simply, we have air conditioning here, obviously we like to be comfortable, but so we continue to do this, and so probably one of the latest, say the last 10 years anyway, is all this deafness that we are doing to ourselves, earbuds, headphones, things like that. Walking through a place like Plaza de Americas, I cannot hear one bird. And when I was walking over to meet with you guys, there were great crested flycatchers up in the trees around there. They make this they just bleep, bleep, and they make this loud kind of a caw sort of a, and there's fascinating birds, but they're all around, and then there was a red-shouldered hawk that flew over, and just, what was it, from across the Plaza America, even with my cast on, it's still not in a 5-minute walk, right? I heard 12 species of birds. You know, and there are people are sitting around, they're not talking to each other, they have their headphones on, and they're looking at something, or they're not hearing anything.
Right.
So, okay, so when you tell someone that they have to unplug, pay attention, look around and everything, that's uncomfortable, because it's been so long since anyone's ever said, you know, just hang out with the birds or whatever.
Building on this notion of unplugging, you've had stints where you go on these crazy meditation retreats and unplug from everything, not just auditory information, but yeah. So can you talk a little bit about that? How you got into that? Who told you that this was a thing? A good idea.
Well, the Vipassana retreats.
Yeah.
I don't know if I can. I might have read something about that. A counselor, I think a counselor that I had back when I very first moved to the area, actually lived between Melrose and Keystone Heights. I had a psychotherapist that I visited with that I'm pretty sure mentioned either I was invited to a meditation, and I asked them about what is this? Well, this is sort of an abbreviated version of a typical Vipassana retreat. I think that's how that happened. So I looked into it more, and I found a very Vipassana-like retreat for just like 7 days at a monastery in South Louisiana, of all places, a Catholic monastery. And the brother that organized this had the Monsignor gave him permission to do this. He was really turned on by the Eastern thought and everything, so he would hold these meditations 2 or 3 a year. And so I went, and it was very difficult at first, but then I really felt the benefit of it. So then I stayed with the practice, and I learned about these. So you could do a 14-day or you could do a 4-week meditation in Western Mass. And I'm sure I can't remember what the name of the retreat center is now, but so I did a 30-day, 4-week retreat, Noble Silence retreat. Yeah, I think that affected the shift that I really need to do, and probably a shift that I'll always keep, or evolve through. Yeah.
What were the rules at the 30-day retreat?
Yeah, so you got up at 4, and
Okay.
yeah, so you got up at 4. You could not make eye contact or say anything to anyone. You had no sound whatsoever, either manufactured or natural, being produced by people anyway. It was in the winter too, so there's like 4 or 5 feet of snow on the ground. So it was you couldn't go outside very much. They'd let you go outside if you want to. It was super cold. I did go outside and sit on the creek a few times because I'm not really super keen on being in a room with a whole lot with a lot of people. And so that was probably one of the more difficult things. You'd sit in a room with 300 people in it, and they're basically sitting closer than we are for 8 hours at a time, meditating. So you start off with 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours in the middle of the day, 2 hours in the afternoon. Then pretty soon that just bleeds into you get up, try to get some breakfast if you can. Get up at 4. Some people, it was so hard for them to get up, so they would just drag until they could just go into the meditation center and forget about breakfast. That's not me. That's my number one meal. But so I would get some eat and go in there. And pretty soon it was you meditated for 6 to noon, so 6 hours. Had an hour off for lunch. Of course, you couldn't make eye contact. It was all vegan food, so that was a bit of an adjustment for me because I wasn't a vegan or vegetarian. And then 6 hours after that, so then it would open that up for the really long meditation days. So you dealt with a lot of stuff, like for one, just physical discomfort, because this was before I had my knee surgery and stuff. It was really painful, especially to have this knee folded in this, that way. But you get over it, you start working through it, and you start ignoring, the fact you're pretty sure that you've got an ant on you or a mosquito's biting you or something like that when they're not there, But so yeah, that was very, very important.
Did you have any visions during it?
Yeah, well, especially when I slept, I had some a lot like just a volume of lucid dreams, and I was, I think I mentioned when we talked last night that I used to astral travel, but I did not do that during the meditation because it was unfamiliar, and I did not want to be out somewhere and then the meditation needed to start. I felt this wasn't safe, but yeah, a lot of vivid dreams. Yeah, and then I think I shared this with you when I left. So okay, you know, I had an old Dodge 4-wheel drive pickup that, you know, I hobbled up there. I didn't think anything about it. All the way up I-95, you know, just all the crazy driving and the noise and the air pollution, all that. It just kind of seemed like that's just the way it is, you know, when you go up a big highway to think about it. But being there for a month and my truck's covered with snow, you know, finally got it to start, and I start, you know, going out of the hills away and I get on the highway, and suddenly I'm 100% not prepared. You know, I'm holding onto the wheel with a death grip, and I'm going about 40 miles an hour on I-95, and I get, and like, but you know, the truck rattled a lot, it shook a lot and everything, but so I didn't really notice before, but suddenly I felt like I was in a death trap.
Wow.
Yeah, and people flying by honking like this, so I found myself pulling over a lot into the rest areas, stuff, just try to catch my breath. You know, because it was
Oh
terrifying.
my God, and after 30 days of silence, it's jarring. Oh my God.
It was wild.
Because you're so sensitive to all the different sensations and environmental movements, and
Right.
yeah, like how were you able to integrate back into daily life after that?
Well, so I don't remember how long it took me to get back, but I drove it straight through, you know, so, but it must have taken twice as long to get back because I was so, it was just a terrifying trip. When I had that cabin on Lake Santa Fe, and so that was nice, because once I got there, I remember just going in, locking the door and sitting down and said, thank God I made it. Yeah, I just didn't want to talk with anyone or see anybody or anything, just want to look out at the lake and just try to get my, you know, kind of reground.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that helped. That was a good transition. And then, you know, I needed to figure out what I was going to do next. So then I just started working with a plan, that plan for that time. Yeah.
So you had some crazy dreams.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What was the wildest one you had? And can you walk us through your process of unpacking dreams?
Sure. Oh, I don't know if I could, I had a lot of wild dreams, but yeah.
Yeah.
But so and this is, so I don't know, you guys probably know this, that apparently, you know, a lucid dream can lead into astral traveling, you know, but most of the time when I did that, I started off and traveled, you know, so to speak.
And for those that don't know, what is that?
So a lucid dream is just like an extremely vivid dream, you know, where you can feel the water, smell the animals, or, you know, you're there, but you haven't actually gone there, you're just experiencing it. That's what apparently, I guess there's a lot of evidence about lucid dreams, but apparently not astral traveling. Astral traveling is where your energy literally leaves your body and goes somewhere else, far away usually. Yeah, and so that's a very different trip, lack of a better term. But so unpacking dreams, this is basically Jungian analysis, you know, as you, like you did in your midterms. You know how you code, you basically code and then you memo and then you develop you know, you start doing some thematic analysis and so on. That's basically what that is. So you write your dream down, leave plenty of space if you're going to do it by hand, and without filters, without the editor running in your head, you know, is just write that down, and then go back and then read over it slowly, and the words and the phrases that catch your attention the most. Doesn't matter. There's no judgment whatsoever. It can seem like the most mundane something or the weirdest something. Circle it and then start doing what, you know, we call it word association, right? So it's words with meaning, not synonyms. Well, let me just think of something really silly. Like one narrative was somebody wrote. They they had thought when they said, do you contribute your being here and caring about where you are and what you're doing to a person, place, or thing? You remember the first question?
Yes, I do.
Yeah. Okay, well, some person said the first thing that came to mind was my granddad and his old white Chevy pickup taking me fishing, and was just write this down. And so they said, is that stupid? I mean, no, I said, no, it's not, because what we do is when we give ourselves that time to write down a dream, we're giving ourselves permission to understand what it is our psyche's trying to tell us, you know? So all words and phrases are codes. They have to be deciphered. You know, it's just like, remember in class 2, I wrote on the board elephant. Okay, everyone knows what an elephant is, right? Well, 60 some odd people had a different word for elephant. So, you know, you just get one level down and then you start doing that. Well, so that's how you unpack the dream, is you start You start decoding it.
Mhm.
And then that's why we wrote onto the side those meaning statements, right?
Mhm.
Because that actually tells the story.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I think it was Jung said that dreams are how our psyche gets by our ego. You know,
Yeah.
it sends a coded message. It writes it in another language, and if we're willing to learn that language or unpack that, then we know what it is that's going on.
I think this is the first time I fully understood what you mean by like words need to be decoded, because words don't just exist in a vacuum in your brain. Words are formed by your beliefs. Like each word has a certain amount of structures and associations to them that make them unique to you. That attach your sense of self to that word, to attach your meaning to that word.
Yeah.
And it's super important to unpack that, because every single thought, every single verbal thought that we have is tied to a certain emotion, feeling tone, bodily sensation, experience and condition of our past, and also prediction of our future.
I agree. And, this is one, why I've just lately, I would say, this semester, last fall's when I started to tell the students that, just, like, for one, I can tell when they switch to chat, when they're writing their essays, because if I could see one.
Oh, ChatGPT.
When I see one of their papers written originally, and then I start seeing a very different way of going about it, they're using chat for it. And so, of course, I can't swear that they're using it a lot, but I can usually tell that they're using it some. Sometimes it's so obvious, I said, okay, what does this word mean? Not sure. Why did you write it down? Well, I didn't write it down. Well, who wrote it down? Yeah. But so, all kidding aside about that is that, I said, maybe you feel like, you've got to get your 12,000 words, for your gen ed requirement or something like that. You want to write, you need to write an essay and you feel like you can't get it out well enough and so on. So I'm not going to judge you about this. But what I do want you to do is keep in mind that you're the only person that can tell your story. And if you want to turn it over to a box, and basically write your story in a lie, then, that, I'm sorry for you. Mm-hmm. That's a big problem. Because you can't use your own code, your natural code, to get it out and understand it if you just simply tell a story to chat and have it write it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't get to interact with your beliefs and stream of consciousness in the way that you otherwise could.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and those beliefs are what make us all different and lead us in different directions and create a habitable society where people are fulfilling different roles, like the variance in our values.
So apps like that, AI apps like Chat, and there's going to be a dozen more, I'm sure, not too long, but that they're actually an agent, an anti-diversity agent, because that's the one thing that technology can do is it can normalize just about anything. Even if it does it inaccurately, it normalizes it inaccurately, but it does normalize. And so suddenly our words just become a mix of anybody else's words or not.
Right.
So and like you're saying, we diversity is the reason why we exist at all. Is the ecological structures that we have.
Do you think there is some use case for AI to help unpack your own narrative? So you're saying your own story, you're giving them the entire narrative of your life, of what's happening, and you don't know how to make sense of it at all. Do you think that a language model can possibly give you some a set of different types of interpretations that you can then unpack from it through your own
I suppose, Sean, I suppose if you were to ask it, okay, I don't know what fill in the blank means, and it generates 20 or 30 possibilities, you might read through, they go, oh, that resonates with me. I think most people, I don't know, I wouldn't have a percentage, but I think most people can do that on their own. It's an exercise, so it's just like meditation, or it's just like anything else, or exercise in the gym, whatever. As we start somewhere and we get better at it and we get more proficient at it, and then if we work more, with it, then we can flex as things change. We can, learn, like for example, I code my dreams now in my head, or I analyze my dreams in my mind now because I'm used to doing that. Sometimes they're so convoluted and so, complex, and there's symbols in there that I haven't seen before, I write those down because this is all new code, you know. But so my psyche, like Jung would say, you know, or we have the collective unconscious, you know, we have the same, a lot of us have the same symbols no matter where we're from, you know, and then we have different ones that come out of our immediate ecology, you know. Yeah.
Something that I've been reflecting on related to coding and related to like interpreting meaning out of our experiences is like when we have like some ineffable experience that we cannot communicate in words at the time, and we try our best to decode some sort of meaning as it's happening to make some sort of sense of what's happening in the world and ourselves, is that potentially dangerous? Is that kind of a consolidation mechanism of our beliefs and like making us say that this is exactly what has happened even when like it's ineffable, like our words cannot express what actually happened. Maybe we need to take more time to just like sit with the experience itself, and then over time it naturally unfolds into a narrative in our mind that we can extract and decode. Is there like a delay period that you would recommend in that case?
I mean, so I think that to the extent that we maintain a connection with nature and we maintain our heart, you know, kind of a heart-mind connection. How am I feeling? What am I thinking? Because you know, thinking creates emotion, emotion creates behavior. You know, so we just being in touch with that will allow us to flow with a wider variety of situations and environments. To the extent that we've concretized almost that, you know, that process, turn that process off and just plow forward, then lots of things will seem pretty threatening and pretty abstract to us. You know, I think. Well, just, okay, you know, we both had difficulty finding a place to park today because it was one of the move-out days. Well, I found it fascinating that just in the garage, there's what I would think would be a normal order of things, you know? You drive on the right side, you know, you don't park in the middle, or whatever the case be. Just these cars randomly stopped in the middle of the drive. Nobody can get by, and somebody's on their phone texting, and they're blocking the entire driveway. You know, I mean, it's just and then when somebody honks their horn, they freeze. They don't know what to do because they don't see that that's a problem because they've probably not ever had to interact with anyone that much where they negotiate that space, so they're frozen. So I don't know. It moved. Obviously, we found a place to park, but that's just kind of a very sort of maybe a silly example, but you know, yeah. So we do, I think sometimes too, no matter, we have to know if we should get ourselves out of a situation, and then we can figure out what was it that seemed so, you know, averse or whatever, but yeah.
Yeah, the reason I ask is with the advent of psychedelics, a lot of these experiences are involving people pretty much deconstructing the narratives and constructs of their mind so that they can connect deeper into themselves, into their psyche, into their body, into their surroundings, into nature. But I find myself and in others, when we take a psychedelic, there is like this kind of pull to want to categorize something as like so divine, so like grasp onto it as like, this is my connection with God, like this is what God is right here. And over time I start to realize that might not be the most useful way of allowing the experience to unfold naturally, because that creates a construct in real time when kind of the idea of connecting or dropping our constructs, dropping our sense of self and connecting with the environment, being one with our environment. I think that takes like a loosening of our self-referential thoughts, our consolidation of our thoughts. And only after it happens can we truly integrate it into something very meaningful that we can interpret.
Well, you know a lot more about the biochemistry, psychobiology of psychedelics than I do, but what I have noticed is that as there's an attraction to that because it's easy. You know, somebody recognizes that they need to deepen, expand their consciousness, their presence. They want to connect better with nature. So again, if this is a product of our society, well, why don't I just put my earbuds in and turn on a meditation, and then I'm fine, right? Or why don't I just take whatever, trip some, you know, and I feel a lot better about myself and the world in general. When I know that's not the purpose of it in the context of therapy or something, but one thing I think it does take time to actually get to a place where you can turn off the noise, sit, meditate, connect, and then be honest with, because things come up in our dreams. If we are honest when we decipher our dreams, we're going to get information that we don't necessarily like, you know. And it can be about our behavior, it can be about somebody that's in our world that shouldn't be, or just fill in the blank, you know.
Right.
Yeah, that takes hard work.
Yeah.
It's worth it though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Have you ever / do you believe in a God, and how has fluctuations in your conception of one affected your life?
Definitely, I've always believed that there is a God, or
Yeah.
gods. Yeah, and so again, you know, so if we go with the sciences of how and what, we can basically describe how life formed on Earth, right? From you know, the Big Bang, from the magma, from, you know, the heated waters to, you know, the blue-green bacteria, and then eventually phytoplankton, and just, you know, tumble along. We kind of have that story pretty well down, but we don't know why.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we know how, we know what, but we don't know why. So that has always been something I said. I'm not a religious person by a denomination or a structure or anything like that, but I'm not anti-religion. I do not find going to a building or doing anything like that necessarily to where I can connect with the gods or God, you know. But people do. I mean, that's fine. But yeah, definitely, because it's the why, you know. So okay, we have the how and the what part of the story. We'll have so why it seems to fit.
So whatever the why is what you are referring to, and you use the word God.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and okay, when we can explain the evolutionary development of biodiversity, right? We can pretty much do that, and we're getting even better at that now with genetics.
Yeah.
In the way we can map genes and entire species, and it's really cool to learn about how so many species we thought were a species, when they look more closely at now with the science, the improvements in technology, we found that we're actually looking at 4 or 5 different species of a bird or an insect or a small mammal that we always thought was just that same animal across these different places, and that tells a much richer story.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, like when we're in nature and we're loving what we're doing. I mean, you see an elephant that's walking through with their calves, or you know, you're sitting in a boat and you see a pod of dolphins, you know, a flock of birds overhead, like at Sweetwater Wetlands Preserve or something like that. That's all, you know, that's ecology happening, right? But also, why is it so beautiful to us?
Mm-hmm.
So to me, that's the God connection there, you know. Yeah.
I want to unpack more qualities of this God. So it has to do with beauty. Do you think that it cares about us as humans? Does it think humans are special? And does it matter if it cares about us?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know. So, okay, yes, I believe that whomever, that the gods do care for us, but yeah. I think that we're way off base when we think we're the ones that they care most.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I think that I'm projecting now, okay, I'll confess, is that I would be so upset with us, with everything that we're given, all the beauty we're giving, and how stupid we can behave with each other and the planet, you know. So I don't know how I don't know how the gods or God works with that. Mm-hmm. Probably never will, but so, and I think that favor, good fortune, you know, is something that comes for people. Of course, it can come with privilege, but then people who have very little privilege whatsoever, very few resources whatsoever, feel very blessed. You know, I've hundreds of times have been in a classroom, listening to questions, great questions, and talking with students and listening to what their work. And so this Thoreau in Walden Pond said that truly the gods have favored me over other men. and I just feel that way. I mean, I don't think that I've been favored over other men, except that I can't, it's difficult for me to believe, or, I mean, it's not difficult for me to believe, it's just I'm overwhelmed with the experience of being so fortunate. And so that would be God, you know, this experience of it. Gratitude is a gift from the gods.
Yeah.
It's gets a gift from nature, if you will, so the energy through that would be from God or the gods.
Yeah.
That's been my, you know, I mean, my dad was an atheist, and my mom was, she was sort of she was like a superstitious Christian, and it was just, she was really funny about this. She wanted to make sure she covered her bases. And so we would go to, what was the big three? We'd go to, what was it, Thanksgiving, Christmas, and New Year's. I mean, and, Easter, I'm sorry. So obviously I'm not thinking about it that well, but, so see, one time I remember when we were kids, we would go in and I said, Mom, does God really care if we go to church on Easter? Shh, I don't know, but if he does, we'll go. Like, just don't say it too loud. But this was the way she was just like, it was just really hysterical. And I think even though that was an odd way of looking at things from my perspective, I think it helped me actually just relax about the whole thing about religion, you know, and don't get too attached to it. And then also we spent a lot of time outdoors, especially before we moved to Dallas, when we lived in, you know, coastal parts of Florida, rural Florida, and we just, you know, just got to feel it, and it felt really good, and it didn't cost anything. So my mom to take my brother and I out, or let us go out and explore, you know, and just be. Yeah.
Do you fear death? Or have any intuitions about what might happen or anything like that?
Well, so, you know, I do. I mean, I don't know that I fear death. What I think, clearly what I do fear is I fear that time will run out before I do all that I want to do. You know, I mean, there's a shelf life, right? There's an expiration date. We don't know when that is. And I'm not going to live in fear of it. But at the same time, I just want to respect every second, do the best I can, and know that at some point, you know, I will be alone, and anyone else I've ever known will be alone, and we won't be here. You know, that's a hell of a thing to think about, but it is. So what happens? You know, I mean, clearly we know why so many religions have these life after death stories. If you do these certain things, right, you can go to heaven or wherever if you follow those rules, you know. So who wrote the rules? Yeah, that doesn't work. Yeah, right? So I don't know what happens. You know, one time I was very, almost preoccupied about the life after death and some things like that, because I guess part of some of the books I was reading were people had actually claimed to be a mediator for people from the, you know, past lives, or for in other planes, they would say, and they talk about conversing with them. I've had some. I think I shared this with you, didn't I? When I got my first place out west, bought my first house, and I built an office out of what was like an apartment, sort of a mother-in-law's suite. Did I tell you about this?
Don't think so.
Okay. Well, so
yeah.
Let me quick. I don't know how much time we have here.
Plenty.
Okay.
As much as you have.
Okay.
Yeah.
So great. Anyway, I had, the house was in really bad condition, so the first thing I did is I basically reconstructed the entire house myself. I had time, you know, I was working part-time at Santa Fe and just doing some field work and streams and stuff. So anyway, I got that done, and I made this, I took what was the bedroom of this mother-in-law suite, and I converted it to an office. And then what was the kitchen, I made that the washroom, so on. Anyway, so one of the first days that I was in that office, had it done, I was looking, and somebody was standing beside me to my right, and I turned and they disappeared, and I thought, wow, that's weird. I was really tired a lot then, because I was doing so much work and so forth. I thought, well, you know, I just blew it off. So then I started working again a few days later, and there was some back, but in the interim, I had been reading about people who claim to have connected with people that have passed on, you know. And they said, never make eye contact with the spirit that visits you, something to that effect. So so that stuck, even though I thought that was, you know, I wasn't really working with it that well, I wasn't processing. So the person with the yellow outfit on came back and was standing. This time, instead of turning around, I just turned enough to where I could just barely see her in a peripheral vision. She was elderly, she was wearing a yellow dress with a white apron. And I said, are you okay? And then there was this interesting shift in the energy, and then she left, and she didn't leave abruptly like the time before, she just quote, floated away. Okay, I thought, all right, I really did see someone. Who, you know, where are they from? Is this something that I'm manifesting out of my own thoughts, or is this what's happening, you know? And I've never subscribed to or not, you know, the ghosts and so forth. It's always been interesting, but not anything I have had an opinion about. Fast forward, I was working out, I was setting up gardens and stuff in the front of the house, and neighbors came across to meet me, just to introduce themselves, really nice people, and so I was talking, and so how did this come up? So George was telling, the neighbor was telling me about who the people that lived there before, and that they had their, and that they had moved his mother in, and they made that place for her to stay, like a little apartment and everything. And so he said it was the weirdest thing because she never wore anything but a yellow dress and a white apron.
Wow.
And so I'm sure my accountants probably had just like told the whole story. He said, "Are you okay?" And then I told him what I just told you. And honestly, his wife Betty, I thought she was going to pass out. It was so shocking. And then I went on to describe a little bit more about what I saw and everything. And so, you know, and she had died, by the way, she had died 2 or 3 years before I bought the house.
That's wild.
Yeah,
Incredible.
I don't know.
Yeah.
So, and why was she there? You know, I've read a lot of things about that. They say, well, they're there too because there's something unresolved, or they're there because, you know, they're concerned about something, or some people say they're not ready to leave yet.
Yeah, maybe it's their home.
It's their home, and
some attachment to it.
and then when I thought about it, you know, afterward, I thought, my God, you know, I just breezed my way in there and blew the whole place apart and reconstructed it the way I wanted to. It was somebody's house, or it was their home at one time. And you know, I go about things a lot more thoughtfully because of that, just thinking about what I might do, you know, so that first honor the place, even if I might not know, you know, who's been there, you know,
Yeah, I was actually talking to a friend Angelina about spirits literally yesterday, because another one of our friends had dealt with like living in a haunted house situation where as a child she had an imaginary friend named Margot, and came to realize that after a lot of like superstitious things happened with like doors opening randomly in the house, there was a previous house owner that was named Margot, and
Wow.
they passed away, and Angelina suggested that in that situation it's really important to develop a sense of respect and kind of reverence for this being, but also make sure that that's shared for that being to you, and make sure that that being also respects that it's your place now as well. And like she had her time, or they had their time in this environment, and it's time for them to leave or depart as well. Or if they have a way to share the space together, then that can also work out potentially, if they're
Interesting.
respectful
Yeah.
enough.
So we've talked a lot about a lot of peak and transformative experiences you had, but how do you keep your everyday life meaningful and purpose-driven?
Well, you know, that's really pretty easy.
Yeah?
Yeah, for at least because as long as I'm a professor, that's pretty easy.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. So I've set, you know, I've intentionally set my day-to-day up that I can do the best that I can for students. So being able to serve students in the context of education and well-being and a safe place to stop, you know, or whatever, that's incredibly meaningful. So it happens by being there, you know, just by being available and being there. That it just happens. So and then also, since I'm also the undergraduate coordinator, which I'm grateful for too, that has a different energy and flow, and that it's, you know, there can be some very strange things happening because the administrations in general are pretty weird, you know, not just UF or higher ed, or it's just, you know, the offices I've been in technology, offices I've been in the labs, or whatever it is, that there's a dynamic there that you really wonder, why are some of these people here? You know, it seems like they're here to create problems. But, you know, that's just an observation. That's why I really do not like office environments, you know. I mean, when you look at when you could be in a classroom as opposed to being in an administrative office somewhere, wow, you know,
Right.
easy. But so that's that part. You know, I will say though that what's on my mind at some point in the not too distant future, I will retire. And so what will I do with that? You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What will you do?
I don't know. I have some ideas, you know.
Yeah.
One of them would be to invest a lot more time in SciFi, in the elephant organization.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then teach, hopefully. Write.
Yeah.
Write more. Just
Yeah.
Write time to write is a little limited right now. So summers, I can usually get some writing done.
I feel like once a lot of like the duties of work are relieved, it might just allow a lot more space and time for creative flow. And for me personally, I need that space and time for creative flow, and that gives me a lot of meaning, a lot of purpose.
Yeah. Yeah.
What does your creative process look like? From like an empty canvas, like a blank slate, how do you like put an idea out into the world or out onto the canvas or paper? And is it like, do you have an idea of what you want to create before you create something, or before you write something, or does it just come out and it forms into something that you want to offer to the world?
Well, in the case of writing, I will, you know, I have several things that I want to write about now. And so I know what I want to write and basically what I want to say. It's sitting down and putting that together. You know, so writing's one way, speaking is another. You know, like, for example, like, halfway into getting, you know, preparing for my TED Talk, I really wondered, I thought, gosh, this is taking forever. And it would be 9 months before I would actually go on the stage. But with each step, I felt like I was able to communicate what was most important from me to whomever in a way that was more intelligible each time. And so with that talk, I felt like that was an evolutionary step that I had made, because I always felt like, okay, I have a voice when it comes to, you know, human dignity, positive psychology, sustainability, like this, and it's in this room. And I have not really ever wanted to put myself up in front of a lot of people. That's just not my style. I don't like being in the center of attention. But it's weird because I wind up being in the center of attention because I have to be. You know, so I've gotten used to that over time. But so being able to speak, well, like what we're doing right now, you know, I mean, being able to talk about these things and then share what we're talking about with other people, and finding that it resonates with them, and then they communicate with us, is, to me, that's very meaningful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What other practices, writing, teaching, what are practices that are meaningful that anyone can try out?
Well, okay, it depends. I mean, one of the things, like the Aware Ambassadors for the Wellness Center had an activity that they had in the Plaza of the Americas. I don't know if you stopped by one of the days. They were basically there for a week, but different times during the day. And so I just volunteered to take students around and tell them what birds were singing. And then they said, well, how do you know this? And I said, well, you listen to them, and then you look them up, and you get binoculars, whatever, you try to find them. But I said, this is a really cool app from Cornell Lab, Macaulay Lab. It's the iBird, or it's called a Merlin. And you basically can turn it on, and it'll pick up the sound. It mines from a database of just millions and millions of songs, different styles, different types of songs from the same birds, different birds. So you turn on, you can say, okay, that's a great crested flycatcher we were talking about them just a minute ago. That's what they look like. Here's their range. You punch it down, opens up that page. Here's where they are now. Here's where they'll be next month, and something. And so you can do that. And I said, anytime I hear a bird, like for example, we go up to North Carolina quite a bit. Well, I do not know the birds nearly as well as I do here. So I'll hear a bird song. I'll just stop and I'll look at it. Oh wow! I'll add that to my list, and then I listen to it and I play it over and over and over again until I finally get, anytime I hear that bird, I know what it is.
That's cool.
So that's anybody, most
Yeah.
anyone can do that.
Yeah.
the students I took out said, "Gosh, I never really realized there were birds out here." Or, but I said, "But you've heard them." I said, "Yeah, but I guess I just didn't think about it then."
Right.
Walking around with them a little bit longer, they were hearing really well. They really were tuning in. Yeah, and that's an excellent exercise, one of the many for gratitude. When you hear a bird sing, you can simply say thank you. Yeah. So that's a practice of meaning.
I like that. That's
Yeah.
very unique and very you. You also, I just have to know. So you've worked out for a long time. You used to play football, right?
I did.
What's your all-time best bench press?
Oh, a low fours.
Ooh.
Low fours.
No
Yeah.
way, dude. Oh, I got work to do. All right. I've been second.
Well, I don't know. You're in fantastic shape, Jared. I mean, I would if I could go back 25 years or whatever like this when I was like obsessed with powerlifting. If I could go back and think, okay, it's not that important. I probably would have 2 shoulders, haven't had surgeries on. Would probably still have 2 knees that were my own. So I overdid it. Like I said, my entire approach to anything was overage.
Yeah. That's wild. I wasn't ready for that answer, but that's cool. Well, to wrap this thing up, it's been such a pleasure. It's been so good. I just want to
wrap it up with a bench press.
Yeah, no. I want to bring it back to, so right now we live in an interesting world that some of us are dissatisfied with, many even. And I want to know, what's an encouraging thought that you've had that you'd like to share with our many of the viewers are probably nervous, feeling a lot of uncertainty.
Well, rightfully so.
Yeah.
So I'll just share what I do. Basically, is I'm careful with what I read and how much of some things that I read. I don't necessarily need a play-by-play, bullet-by-bullet reminder of what terrible things are being done by the Trump administration, for example. And what the sociopath that Vladimir Putin is doing to Ukraine. These are happening. And I don't need the details about how many people have died and things. I know that more people are dying than they even have records for, and that's horrific. So what I work on is say, okay, is there anyone talking about a true change model? Because our democracy isn't broken, it's shattered. There has to be something much differently. We have to do something much differently. And who's talking about this? When looking at organizations like environmental and social justice organizations that have been successful for decades, what are they talking about? These new groups that are kind of moderate mixes of former Republicans and Democrats and Libertarians and independents and all that, they're coming together and they're talking about things they haven't talked about before because it was too convenient to be isolated. And now they're ready, okay, we're facing fascism now. That's not an exaggeration. We are already experiencing a fascist regime here. It's a fact. It doesn't matter. What's the conversation now that we have to realize we must work together? We can't have the convenience of pointing fingers at each other. So that's what I'm doing. I'm looking up, subscribing to their news feeds, when I can, I tune into one of their interviews on a podcast. And just learn, because there's something happening. There's an opportunity here with the Trump administration for us to do a lot better with our country and our people, and he's making it stark what we shouldn't be doing. So, okay, what do we do, right?
Yeah.
It's no longer in the closet. It's not behind the curtain. It's right up front.
Yeah.
Do you see a sense of like camaraderie of people coming together on the ground?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Liz Cheney voted for Kamala Harris. Are you kidding?
Right.
Yes. Anything can happen. Any good thing can happen. We have to find out how do we catalyze it. Where do we get in and help with that?
Yeah.
I think that's what a lot of our listeners are kind of thinking about and worrying about, like, as we really figure out our career paths. How can we be of service and make sure we're not contributing to this cesspool of nonsense?
Yeah, cesspool of nonsense. That works.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for listening. So what I learned today was, even according to a scientist, it's good to have emotions and lean into that fantastical, dream-inspired, and value-driven part of yourself. You should respect every second of your life because there's an expiration date. And going hand in hand with that, some form of respect might be to accept change, If you know something, do something different. And, you know, you're either going to have the pain of discipline and striving, or the pain of regretting not doing so.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, so make that choice. Thank you so much, Dr. Chandler.
Thank you
It's
so
been a
much.
pleasure. Crushed it.
Thank you.
Yeah. Cool. Later.